What happens when a handful of people accidentally slip a full century into the past and end up rewriting the history of the world? Except in doing so, they commit a blunder of staggering proportions. One single altered moment back there is enough to bring everything crashing down. How can one tiny change shake an entire future? And now, can they use time travel all over again to put things back the way they were? So our story opens on a news reporter named Ezra, whose career so far has been going absolutely nowhere. Today, though, the biggest break of her life is about to land in her lap. Her boss tells her she's being sent to Turkey to write a feature on a hotel there that has been standing for 130 years. Called the Pera Palace, this building isn't merely the oldest hotel in the country. The story of how Turkey won its freedom is stitched directly into its walls. So Ezra, thrilled beyond words, makes her way over to the hotel to begin work on her article. The manager there, a man named Ahmet, welcomes her in and starts walking her through everything the place has witnessed. He tells her how, a full century earlier in the year 1919, a young woman named Pera, granddaughter of the man who owned this very hotel, pulled Turkey's greatest revolutionary, General Mustafa Kemal, out of the path of British soldiers who meant to end his life. And it was precisely that rescue which eventually allowed Turkey to break loose from the British Empire. Ahmet then brings up room 411. Back in 1926, he explains, a woman simply vanished out of that room and was never seen by another living soul again. All the staff ever recovered from inside was one old key, and to this day, nobody has cracked the mystery of where she went. By now, evening has crept in, and a heavy downpour has started outside. So Ahmet suggests that Ezra spend the night at the hotel rather than travel in it. Ezra has no objection whatsoever. The deeper she digs into this building, the stronger her article is going to be, which is exactly why she deliberately requests room 411, the very room where that bizarre disappearance took place 100 years ago. Ahmet then shows her the key itself, the one recovered from the missing woman's room after she disappeared. He isn't willing to hand it over, though, and he takes it away with him when he leaves. Ezra settles into room 411 and starts unwinding. But then, for reasons she can't explain, she spots an identical key sitting right there on the table in her room. She assumes Ahmet must have left it behind for her. The instant her fingers close around that key and the clock strikes 12, the entire room begins to shudder violently. Ezra has no idea what is happening, and once things finally go still again, she bolts straight out of the room in sheer panic. Except now, inexplicably, everything on the other side of that door has changed. There's an old-fashioned dance party in full swing out here, and that's when it hits Ezra. Standing in this very room is General Mustafa Kemal, the revolutionary Ahmet had just been telling her about. That's the moment she works out the impossible. Through some means she cannot begin to understand, she has time traveled a full 100 years backwards. She is standing in the year 1919, back when Turkey was still under British control, and this entire thing has happened because of room 411. It also clicks for her why that woman vanished in 1926. In all likelihood, she was swept into another time exactly the way Ezra just was. Ezra is still trying to get her bearings when a man named Halit strikes up a conversation with her, talking as though the two of them are already well acquainted. Also at this party is a British officer named George, who is angling to get close to General Mustafa Kemal so he can eliminate him and choke the independence movement to death. Meanwhile, back in the present day, Ahmet notices something strange happening to his finger and immediately realizes that the reporter, Ezra, has accidentally been pulled into the past, which tells us he already knew all about that room and what it does. What he can't work out is how she managed it, since the key that triggers the jump was in his possession the whole time. So how on earth did she get back there? With that question eating at him, Ahmet takes the plunge and travels the 100 years himself. The moment he arrives, he mistakes a completely different woman for Ezra, because as it turns out, the two of them are identical. He then hunts down the real Ezra in this timeline. Ahmet demands to know how she got here when he was holding the key. Ezra tells him she found a second key waiting in her room and has no clue who left it there. Ahmet, furious now, tells her she had no business coming to this era, because if even the smallest thing shifts here, their entire future gets rewritten. Turkey might never win its independence at all. And on top of that, they can't jump forward again right now, because the room and the key only permit travel at one fixed moment, midnight, every single night, which means whether they like it or not, they're stuck here for a full day. To make sure Ezra doesn't disturb anything in this era, Ahmet locks her inside a room. Then he heads out himself to check whether she had already altered some event before she ran into him. Upstairs, however, Ezra gets the door open and slips out along the balcony. The truth is, she wants to soak up as much of this era as she possibly can for her article. And in the middle of doing that, she lets something catastrophic slip. She tells the British officer George about the future. She tells him that General Mustafa Kemal is going to liberate Turkey before long, and the British will be sent running. What Ezra doesn't grasp is the sheer scale of the historical event she has just derailed. Because armed with that information, Officer George resolves to kill Mustafa Kemal by any means available to him, no matter how far he has to go to do it. A little while later, once the party has wound down and Ezra is out walking the streets, she catches sight of George speaking privately with Khalid. George is insisting they need to finish Mustafa Kemal off immediately. The reasoning is simple. Because Khalid is Turkish himself, if Mustafa dies at his hands, nobody will suspect the British had anything to do with it, which means Khalid is in league with the occupiers. Ezra is crouched there taking all of this in when Amit comes up behind her and starts scolding her. Why did she leave her room? Their raised voices carry, and George and Khalid catch the sound from where they're standing. George quickly tells Khalid that this girl has overheard their entire plan and orders him to follow her and kill her. Ezra and Amit take off and hide themselves back in the hotel room. And it's here that Ezra spots another photograph of herself, one from this exact period. In reality, it's the woman whose face is a mirror of her own, and Amit clearly knows something about her that he isn't willing to say out loud. A while later, once everything is quietened down, the two of them return to room 411, the room their key can carry them out of. By Amit's reckoning, midnight is nearly here. If they each have a key in hand, they should be pulled back to their own time. But strangely, 12 comes and goes, and absolutely nothing happens. Amit says there's only one explanation for that. They've caused some serious damage to the timeline. Right then, a noise comes from the bathroom. They go through and find the woman who shares Ezra's face, the one Amit had mistaken her for earlier. Her body is lying there on the floor of room 411's bathroom. Somebody has killed her. Amit works it out immediately. Because Khalid had been trailing Ezra with orders to kill her, he must have spotted this woman inside the hotel. And since her face was identical to Ezra's, he ended her life believing she was the one who knew the plan. And that means something has gone very badly wrong. But why does it matter so much? That's when Amit reveals a far bigger secret. The murdered woman is none other than Pera, the very woman who, in the time to come, was supposed to save General Mustafa Kemal from the British. But now that she has died prematurely because of Ezra's blunder, she will never be there to save him, and Turkey will never break free of British rule. In other words, by arriving in the past, Ezra has committed the single worst mistake imaginable. Because of her, history has been rewritten, and Turkey will never be a free country. Amit shouts in frustration that this is exactly why he shut her in a room to begin with, and she refused to listen to a word of it. After turning it over for a moment, Amit lands on something. Since Ezra's actions have already changed everything, and since Paraid's face was a perfect match for hers, Ezra will now have to step into Paraid's life and carry out every single thing the real Pera was supposed to do in the original timeline. That's the only way their future survives intact. Ezra agrees to it and quickly changes into Paraid's clothes. Looking the part is one thing, though. She has no idea where this woman actually lived. And as her luck would have it, she has barely stepped out of the hotel before she runs headlong into Khalid, the man who was hunting her the previous night. George is with him, and both of them are stunned to see Pera walking around alive. Khalid immediately starts tailing her again to get to the bottom of it, while Ezra runs for her life. Fortunately, she crosses paths with a police officer named Rashad, a man who has been quietly in love with Pera for a long time. He too fails to notice that this isn't the real Pera, but her look-alike from a century in the future. Ezra seizes the opportunity and asks him to drop her home, which shakes Khalid off her trail, and at the same time tells her exactly where she's supposed to live. Once she's home, the family notices right away that Paraid's entire manner has changed. Even so, it never crosses their minds that this isn't their daughter. Her father, Naim Effendi, scolds her for having stayed out all night. In the middle of all this, Ezra picks up two crucial details. The Paraid whose place she's taken is already a widow, and she has a young daughter named Layla. The family then tells her to get ready because some important guests are coming over for dinner that evening. And when night falls, Ezra discovers those guests are none other than Khalid and George. After dinner, Ezra quietly eavesdrops on a conversation between her father Naim and George. She learns that the British Army wants to store its weapons in Naim's warehouse, so they can launch an attack on the rebels. Meaning Paraday's own father is collaborating with the occupation. Halit catches her listening in and warns her she has no business overhearing these conversations. She was doing exactly the same thing the night before. He threatens her outright. If she ever breathes a word to anyone about their plan to kill Mustafa Kemal, he will not let it go. He then tells her to meet him alone the following day. Just then, Officer Reyshat spots the two of them and walks over, forcing a nervous Halit to back away from Paraday. Elsewhere, Amit meets a woman named Sonia who works at the hotel. Sonia was a princess from a royal family, but the World War forced her to flee and start over in Turkey. As it happens, Amit has a very particular connection to this woman, one that gets revealed further down the line. Back at Parade's house, Ezra begins trying to make sense of this era and the people in it. That's when she catches sight of Paraday's daughter Layla, and the guilt lands hard. If only she hadn't come here and wrecked things. This little girl's mother would still be alive, and Ezra wouldn't be standing in her place. By the next day, Ezra has started writing down everything she has managed to learn about Paride, so that nobody can catch her out as an imposter. From there, following Amit's plan, she intends to save General Mustafa Kemal and keep the original timeline from breaking. Then she stumbles across a diary belonging to Paride, and tucked inside it is a newspaper clipping. The report says that back in 1916, a woman's corpse was discovered in one of the rooms of the same Pera Palace hotel, and inexplicably, that body was the spitting image of Paride herself. Ezra takes one look and races straight for the hotel, where she tells Amit everything the article said. Hearing it, Amit understands instantly, and he explains what he did. The night the real Paride was killed, he placed her body inside room 411 so it would be carried off into some other time, and nobody would ever discover that the real Paride was dead and Ezra had taken her place, which means that body landed 3 years earlier in 1916. And that's precisely how the Paride of this era came to read about a corpse with her own face 3 years ago. So a single act of time travel has already begun spawning paradoxes, and both of them know these are only going to get more tangled as things go on. They need to fix this as fast as humanly possible. With that in mind, Ezra takes a risk and goes to meet Halit at his bar, where he had invited her the night before. What she really wants is confirmation of whether Halit was the one who killed the real Paride because of her. So she mentions that someone tried to kill her the previous night, making it fairly obvious she means him. Halit denies it flatly. He points out that if he'd wanted her dead, he'd hardly be standing here dancing with her. And besides, he knows her father, who is on their side. So what possible reason would he have to kill her? Which makes one thing clear. The real Paride, whose body Ezra and Amit found in their bathroom, was not killed by Halit. Somebody else did it. But who? And just like that, a fresh problem opens up. When Ezra gets back to the hotel, she finds Amit unconscious on the floor. Once he comes round, he explains that he'd been reading through Paride's diary when someone struck him on the head from behind, knocked him out, and made off with it. So there is somebody in this era who knows exactly what these two are, travelers from 100 years in the future. Amit then shares what he had managed to read before the diary was taken. When Paraday discovered that body 3 years ago, she understood almost immediately that the corpse was her own, and she began investigating. That investigation led her to Dmitri, the hotel's chief contractor, the architect who built the place. Dmitri then let Paride in on a whole host of the building's secrets, including the fact that different rooms in this hotel open onto different points in the past and the future, meaning Paride had known everything about this hotel long before any of this began. Amit's conclusion is that Paride must have come to the hotel that night specifically to find out who was going to kill her. And in that exact moment, someone mistook her for Ezra and murdered her. Ezra heads straight home and starts going through Paride's belongings, trying to gauge how much she really knew about the hotel. But right then her father Naim storms in, saying he's received a complaint about her from Halit and that she has no business working against the British. Ezra fires back, asking what kind of man betrays his own country and grovels to the occupiers. Enraged, Naim raises his hand to slap her, but Ezra catches his wrist and tells him he cannot hit her. Naim is left stunned because women in this era simply do not behave this way. What he has no way of knowing is that this isn't his daughter Paride at all, but Ezra from the future, raised in a far more liberal world. Furious, Naim throws Paride out of the house. Layla comes running over and begs to be taken along, but Ezra gently explains that she can't take her and that she'll be safer staying right where she is. Now Ezra needs somewhere to live. That's when she learns that Halit's bar is looking for a singer, so she auditions for the position And it works out in two ways at once. It gives her a roof over her head, and it puts her in a position to keep an eye on Hallett, who is working hand in glove with the British. Ezra performs in front of everyone, and the room loves her. Hallett is impressed enough by the performance to hire her on the spot. It's at this bar that Ezra crosses paths with Sonia, the same Sonia that Amit has been meeting. At this point, neither Ezra nor Sonia herself has any idea what her connection to Amit actually is. The following day, Amit comes to see Ezra and tells her he needs to track down Dmitri, the hotel's architect, the same architect who met Pera 3 years ago and told her about the building's time travel secret. His thinking is that if they can find a way to reach other points in time, they only need to go back a few days to stop Pera from being killed, which would mean they don't have to stay stranded in this era at all, and the damage Ezra caused by arriving here would simply never happen. After a long search, Amit finally locates Dmitri's house, and the moment he steps inside, he sees them, an entire collection of time travel keys. His theory was correct. Each of these keys can carry a person to a different era. All he's ever had is a single key tied to one fixed point in time, and if he can reach different periods, every problem they have gets solved. That's when Dmitri walks in. Amit starts laying out the whole truth of the last several days. How he and a girl named Ezra ended up in this era by accident from 100 years in the future, and how that girl's mistake has now rewritten Turkey's history. All he's asking is that Dmitri give them a key that goes back just a few days, so they can undo the damage and stop this country from being enslaved. Dmitri, however, is furious to hear that these people have been time traveling and interfering with the real timeline. So he locks Amit in his basement, giving himself time to decide what to do next. Meanwhile, Ezra has been searching the entire hotel for Amit without any luck, having no idea Dmitri has him imprisoned at his house. So Ezra decides that until Amit comes back with the keys, she needs to learn more about the British plan so they can't get to the rebel leader Mustafa Kemal. Since her own father is aligned with the British, Ezra goes back to him and puts on a performance of apologizing, saying she's ashamed of how she behaved. Then once she's alone, she slips into his office and starts hunting for the location of the warehouse, the one where the British have stashed their weapons. Next, Ezra deliberately lies to her father, telling him the warehouse is on fire. Naeem panics, grabs his car, and races off toward it. Of course, nothing of the sort has happened, and exactly as Ezra planned it, she's hidden in his vehicle, which is how she finally reaches the warehouse where the British have concealed the arms they intend to use to crush Turkey's rebels. But before Ezra can slip back out, Hallett arrives with George and a whole detachment of British soldiers. Terrified of being spotted, she stays perfectly still in her hiding place. From there, she overhears George telling Hallett that the strike on General Mustafa Kemal has now been scheduled for 3 days from now, and that the attack has to happen at that same hotel. Hallett answers that it will be done. Once they've cleared out, Ezra immediately goes to meet the rebel leader Mustafa Kemal. His guards stop her on the way, explaining that he's unwell and can't see anyone at the moment. Undeterred, she leaves a message for him. He must stay well away from the hotel for the next few days because there could be an attack waiting for him there. Elsewhere, after a great deal of effort, Amit discovers a drain running beneath the basement and manages to escape through it. By now, though, another problem has landed in Ezra's lap. When she gets home, she finds Sonia tied up. Sonia reveals that George and his British soldiers came here before her and took Layla away with them. Terrified, Ezra rushes to the hotel to confront him. There, George tells her he knows Pera found out about their plan and went to warn the rebel leader Mustafa Kemal. So now they've taken her daughter, and they'll use her to get Mustafa killed by her own hand. His condition is blunt. If Pera wants her daughter returned unharmed, she is to throw a party at the hotel and invite Mustafa Kemal to it. He trusts her completely, so he won't be able to turn down an invitation from her, and once he's there, they'll strike and finish him. Shattered by the threat, Ezra returns to the hotel and tells Amit everything, now that he's finally back after all these days. By this point, Officer Rayshat has arrived with the police, having gotten word that Layla has been kidnapped. Ezra can't tell them the truth, though. If she does, British Officer George might harm the child. Ezra has already cost that little girl her mother. She can't let anything happen to the girl herself. Amit, however, sees an opportunity in the situation and lies to Officer Rayshat, telling him that Layla was kidnapped by the hotel's architect, a man named Dmitri. Ezra is baffled as to why Amit would frame Dmitri, but deep down she trusts that whatever he's doing, there's a solid reason behind it. Amit then takes Officer Reshot and the police back to Dimitri's house. The moment Dimitri sees them coming, he runs, and the police give chase. Amit uses the distraction to scoop up every one of the time travel keys stored in Dimitri's home. He then comes back to Ezra and explains himself. He did this so that later they can trade the keys for the rest of the hotel's secrets and the method of traveling through time. Ezra is genuinely impressed by the plan. Once Dimitri gives up the secret of these keys, all they have to do is go back a few weeks, stop Pera from being killed by Ezra's mistake, and everything else corrects itself automatically. Still, Ezra is deeply worried because British officer George has Layla, and on top of that, he's going to use the weapons in that warehouse to crush every last Turkish uprising. So until Dimitri hands Amit the secret of time travel, Ezra decides to work on getting the police to seize those weapons. Ezra and Amit hurry over to the warehouse, only to find the place completely bare. There isn't a single weapon left in it. The next day, Khalid goes to British officer George and reports that rebels attacked the warehouse overnight and stole all of their weapons. George angrily demands to know who was responsible, but Khalid claims they have nothing yet. It all happened under cover of darkness, and it must have been rebels. Having lost his entire arsenal, George is seething. So he summons Ezra again and repeats the threat. He'll release her daughter Layla the moment she invites Mustafa Kemal to her party. George is accelerating his plan out of pure rage now, and he'll go to any length to see it through. Ezra knows that if she's going to save General Mustafa Kemal's life, she first needs to find out where Layla is being held and get her out of George's grip. So she goes to Khalid and puts on an act, lying to him that her daughter Layla is gravely ill and will die if she doesn't get a particular medicine. And if they want her to carry out their work, he needs to get this medicine to her daughter first. Seeing her in tears, Khalid agrees, takes the medicine, and heads out. Ezra quietly follows him, hoping he'll lead her straight to Layla. But surprisingly, Khalid ends up at a secret location where he begins meeting with a group of rebels, every one of them one of General Mustafa Kemal's men. And then Ezra watches Khalid personally hand over the entire British weapons stockpile from the warehouse to those rebels, even though he had lied to George's face that all of it had been looted, meaning the whole thing was a covert operation of Khalid's own design. And here comes the biggest twist of the story so far. Khalid had aligned himself with the British from the very beginning for one reason only: to stay close enough to learn every plan they made and then feed it all back to his rebels. Meaning he isn't a villain at all. Even Ezra had him completely wrong. It was Khalid who armed the resistance with every British weapon and made them far stronger than they were. Watching all of this, Ezra finally breathes again. She steps out in front of him and asks him to tell her where her daughter Layla is being held, so she won't have to invite General Mustafa Kemal to the party and they can all avoid disaster. Khalid tells her, though, that George hasn't disclosed Layla's location even to him. Ever since the weapons were taken, George has started suspecting him too. Up to now, he'd been playing the loyal collaborator so he could hollow the British out from the inside, but that cover is starting to crack. So Khalid gives Ezra some advice. She should absolutely hold the party George wants. She should invite General Mustafa Kemal to it and behave completely normally in front of George, because Khalid has already warned Mustafa Kemal that the whole thing is George's trap to kill him. Ezra shouldn't worry. On the other side of things, Amit goes to visit Dimitri in jail and offers him a deal. He'll get him released and return his keys on the condition that Dimitri tells him every secret of the hotel. Left with no real choice, Dimitri agrees. Once he's out of jail, Dimitri takes Amit with him to a grave. He explains that it belongs to his mentor, the man who actually discovered how to move forward and backward through time. Using those keys along with his mentor's technique, Dimitri was the one who designed that hotel, which means that with the right special key in hand, a person can step out of the hotel's various rooms into entirely different eras. But why had Dimitri been so opposed to Amit time traveling at all? When Amit asks, Dimitri explains that many years ago his mentor discovered time travel for one purpose: to go back and stop his own wife from dying. But when he actually went back to save her, he altered something that resulted in a great many people dying in her place. From that day on, Dimitri became convinced that whatever is meant to happen must be left alone, that human beings have no business interfering with it. The more they toy with time, the more the timeline unravels. Having finished his story, Dimitri suddenly turns and attacks Amit, because Amit now knows every secret the hotel holds. Dimitri's thinking is that with Amit dead, the knowledge of time travel dies right here. But Amit defends himself and manages to convince Dimitri that he means no harm to anyone. All he's trying to do is stop his country's future from being destroyed, and once everything is back to normal, they will never travel through time again. Meanwhile, Khalid finally manages to pin down Layla's location. He then disguises himself as a British soldier and goes in to rescue her. As per his plan, he starts a fire to pull the guards' attention away so he can slip out with Layla unnoticed. At first, it works exactly as intended, but just as he's carrying her past the gates, a British soldier spots him and tries to stop him. Gunfire erupts from both directions, and there's no telling who has been hit. Back at the hotel, the party's already underway. Ezra is a bundle of nerves with no idea what her next move should be. Then she spots Khalid signaling to her from across the room, and she understands instantly. He has Layla, and he's hidden her in one of the hotel rooms. Ezra rushes to her at once, wraps her in a hug, and apologizes to Layla for everything that has happened to her. Then she brings the girl downstairs into the party in full view of everyone, and George is left utterly stunned to see her standing there with her daughter. He can't work out how Ezra found her, which means his plan to assassinate General Mustafa Kemal at this party has now collapsed. Ezra steps forward in front of the entire room and delivers a speech. She congratulates General Mustafa Kemal on his promotion within the army and declares that very soon they will change their future and free Turkey from the British. Officer George can only stand there and watch, powerless to do a thing about it. Then right in the middle of the celebration, Khalid suddenly collapses unconscious to the floor. Ezra rushes him to the hospital, where she's told he had taken a bullet to the stomach and hadn't said a word about it to anyone. What actually happened earlier that day was that when Khalid rescued Layla, he killed the soldier. But in that same exchange of fire, he was shot himself. The doctor explains that the gunshot has allowed a severe infection to spread through Khalid's body, and his condition is critical. If he can survive the next 3 days, there's a chance he recovers. But in all honesty, the odds of him pulling through are very slim. Ezra is devastated by this. She knows all of it happened because he was trying to save Layla, and that he was only doing it because she asked him to. A little later, Sonia finds her and asks about Khalid. When she learns what has happened, Sonia breaks down in tears too, and it becomes clear that she has been quietly in love with Khalid all along. That's precisely why, despite having been born a princess, she'd been working at his bar. And then Ezra learns something that stops her cold. For reasons nobody can explain, Amit's condition is deteriorating here as well. An infection is spreading rapidly through his hand too. Amit reasons that whatever is happening to him means they must have accidentally altered something in the past that is now striking directly at his very existence in the future. The person he was going to be born through is in mortal danger in this era. Ezra then tells him about Khalid, that he's been shot and is in critical condition. And in that moment, both of them understand. There is a profound connection between Amit and Khalid. And if anything happens to Khalid, Amit will never be born at all. Khalid is Amit's father. That's why the instant Khalid took a bullet, Amit's own body began failing. Casting her mind back through history, Ezra realizes something crucial. The drug that was developed to treat infections, the antibiotic, wasn't actually discovered until 1928. And since they are currently stranded in 1919, no cure exists for Khalid's infection, because that medicine simply hasn't been invented yet. So Ezra makes a decision. She will time travel to a point in time after 1928, bring the medicine back from there, and save both Khalid and Amit. Ezra asks Dmitri for help, wanting him to tell her which room and which key will get her to a time beyond 1928. Frightened as he is, Dmitri hands over room 311 and its special key for Amit's sake. Ezra runs to the room and successfully makes the jump. But when she steps out of the hotel, she's staggered by what she finds. Instead of landing after 1928, she has arrived in 1917, 2 years further back than where she started. And while she's still standing there trying to work out how to get back, she spots the Khalid of this era sprinting past her, 2 men hard on his heels. Ezra doesn't hesitate. She grabs a car, cuts in, and gets him clear before those 2 can lay a hand on him. Coming from the future, she already knows perfectly well that Khalid is a good man, but as far as he's concerned, today is the very first time he's ever laid eyes on her. And that single detail explains something from much earlier in the story. When Ezra first landed in 1919, Khalid was the one who came straight over to speak with her, because from his side of the timeline, he had already met her a full 2 years before that night, and she was the woman who had saved his life from 2 men. Ezra ends up spending the entire day in Khalid's company, and as midnight draws near, she makes her way back to room 311 and returns to 1919. Once she's back, Ezra fills Dimitri in on everything. How she'd overshot and landed 2 years further into the past, and asks him for the correct room and key this time, because Amit and Halit are both deteriorating by the hour. Dimitri is far more careful with his selection now, and this time Ezra lands exactly where she needs to be, the year 1942. Which means the antibiotic she's after finally exists here. But stepping into this era, Ezra sees something that chills her. Because her interference in the past killed Paride prematurely, the British have reduced this country to ruins. The damage is everywhere she looks. Ezra heads straight for a pharmacy and asks for the antibiotic. Instead of dispensing it, though, the man behind the counter reports her to the police, and Ezra is arrested and thrown into a cell. There's another young woman locked in with her, so Ezra asks why on earth she'd be arrested simply for requesting a medicine. The woman looks at her in disbelief and asks whether she seriously doesn't know. The British are hoarding every resource this country has for themselves. And Officer George now rules over the entire nation as its supreme authority. So anyone who steps out of line, even slightly, gets thrown behind bars. Ezra remembers clearly that nothing remotely like this ever happened in the original history, which means the state this country has been reduced to is entirely the result of her going back in time, and she still hasn't managed to undo her mistake. Worse, if she stays trapped in this cell, she'll never make it back to save Amit and Halit. Luckily, a group of rebels storms the prison and breaks every prisoner out. Ezra takes full advantage of the chaos, doubles back to the same pharmacy, and quickly steals the medicine she came for. Then she runs back to her hotel, where all she has to do is hold out until midnight, the only way she can return to 1919 and save Amit and Halit. Except the chaos has spread here too, so she ducks into a room with 2 other people to hide. And that's when an unfamiliar young woman catches sight of Ezra and freezes in shock, because she starts calling her mother. This young woman is none other than Paraday's daughter Layla, the same little girl George abducted back in 1919. By 1942, she's been left to fend for herself, drifting like everyone else. Layla asks how she can possibly look exactly the same. Why hasn't she aged a day? And she disappeared back in 1919, so where has she been all these years? The first thing Ezra does is pull her into an embrace. Then she tells her that even if she explained the truth, Layla wouldn't be able to make sense of it. The better path is for Ezra to go back to the past and stop this entire future from ever coming into existence, and save their country in the process. By now, soldiers outside have started smashing through the door. So Ezra gets Layla out through the balcony, then sits down alone with her key. And the moment the clock's hands land on 12, she's back in 1919. This time she's carrying the infection medicine from the future, and with it, Amit and Halit are both finally pulled out of danger. Amit, however, now that he knows he's Halit's son, is boiling with anger, because according to history, his father walked out on him and his mother the moment he was born, and it's now a certainty that this is exactly what's coming in the future. That's when he tells Ezra the rest of it. His mother is none other than Sonia. That's why he'd been seeking her out from the very start. Ezra puts it together too. Somewhere down the line, Halit and Sonia are going to marry, and Amit will be born from that union. But right then, Dimitri arrives with something genuinely alarming. On the night the real Paride was killed, he says, he watched Halit himself walking out of Paride's room. Hearing that, Amit and Ezra are shaken to the core. Could Halit really have killed the real Paride after all? Because who else would have done it? Over the following weeks, Halit recovers well enough to be discharged from the hospital. Sonia cares for him devotedly throughout, and eventually she proposes to him. But the entire time, the only person on Halit's mind is Ezra. Ezra, for her part, has been deliberately staying away from him because she has no intention of altering history. If Halit ends up not marrying Sonia because of his feelings for her, Amit will simply never be born. And on top of that, she and Amit both still suspect Halit is hiding something from them, and that he may well have been the one who killed the real Paride of this era that night. Meanwhile, Halit goes to meet British officer George, who reveals that he's devised a brand new plan to kill Mustafa Kemal. Tomorrow, Mustafa will be traveling by ship along with his comrades, so they'll plant a bomb aboard that vessel. George tells Halit to be ready for the operation. Once George has left, Ezra meets with Halit and starts pressing him for answers, while Amit hides in the bathroom listening to every word. Here, Ezra finally tells him the truth she'd been holding back, that she isn't the real Paride, and that she has been living in her place. But Halit cuts her off mid-sentence. He already knew. In fact, he also knows the real Paraday was killed that very night. And then Halit lays out the whole story. 2 years ago, When he met her for the very first time, he was taken with her instantly. But after that day, she never appeared again, so he began searching for her everywhere. Then one day he did spot Pera, except she was married and had a daughter, which told him straight away that this wasn't the woman he'd met. At the time, he assumed she must be Paraday's twin sister, and that sooner or later, he'd track the other one down. Then came the night Ezra overheard their conversation. Hallett followed her, yes, but only on George's orders. What he actually wanted was to warn her to keep her distance from George. On the way, though, he caught sight of her running in a completely different set of clothes, so he went after her. When the door stayed shut for far too long and screaming started coming from inside, he climbed across from the adjoining ledge and looked into her room. And there was the real Parid, already dead, killed by someone before he ever got there. Strangest of all, there was nobody else left in the room. Lying on top of the body was a ring, and it belonged to whoever had killed Parid that night. So Hallett picked up that ring and slipped out through the adjoining room, which is almost certainly the moment Dmitri spotted him hurrying away. But he hadn't killed Paridi. Someone else had already done it and gone. Ezra asked him to show her the killer's ring. Then he asked her the obvious question, why is she living as Parid, and who is she really? She tells him she'll explain all of it herself, and soon. The next day, Ezra shows the ring to Amit, and his reaction is one of pure disbelief. That ring, he tells her, belongs to his mother, Sonia. The two of them work out a plan to get to the truth. Ezra puts the ring on and heads down to the lobby, and the pair deliberately position themselves so that Sonia's gaze lands on it. Sure enough, Sonia recognizes it immediately, and she explains that it's a family heirloom she pawned to a jeweler 2 years ago. So how has it ended up on Ezra's finger? Ezra and Amit go straight to that jeweler, who confirms it too. The ring Sonia handed over to him is identical to this one. But how can two rings be identical right down to the same serial number? Which means the ring found beside Paridi's body didn't come from this era at all, it came from the future. And with that, the mystery of who killed the real Parid tangles up even further. By this point, Hallett has fallen properly in love with Ezra, and one day he proposes to her. Inside, though, Ezra knows she doesn't belong to this time, and beyond that, Amit's very existence depends on Hallett marrying Sonia. She can't put his life at risk, so she turns him down, telling him that Sonia's the one who loves him and that she's the one he should marry, because the two of them would be good together. In truth, Ezra had fallen for Hallett as well, but the timeline was never going to allow them to be together. Elsewhere, British officer George meets with Sonia and recruits her to kill both Mustafa Kemal and Paride. Knowing Sonia was once a princess, George dangles a promise in front of her. If she helps him crush this rebellion and eliminates Mustafa Kemal and Paride, she can rule this country alongside the British. Sonia turns it over in her mind. The man she loves, Halit, is in love with Paridi, and it's that bitterness that makes her say yes to George's offer. But she decides on her own order of business. She'll kill Parid first, so that Halit becomes hers. Meanwhile, Halit sets out to raid the fresh shipment of British weapons, just as he had every previous time. What he doesn't realize is that today it's a trap George has laid specifically to catch the traitor in their ranks. Halit walks right into it and is taken by the British, which means the occupiers now know it was Halit all along, living among them while feeding every secret they had straight to the rebels. Back at the hotel, Amit is studying that ring, trying to work out how it ended up beside Paride's body that night, when Dmitri storms in furious. One of his keys is missing, he says. So why did Amit steal it without telling him? Amit denies it flatly. Why would he steal a key? Somebody else took it. And then something surfaces in Dmitri's memory. A month ago, on the very night Paride died, he had run into Sonia, and she had looked pregnant. But Sonia isn't even married yet. Right there, both men arrive at the same conclusion. The mastermind sitting behind all of this, the one they've been hunting for weeks, is Sonia herself. Everything starts falling into place, and here comes the single biggest twist of the entire story. The story jumps a year ahead. Sonia has finally married Halit and is carrying his child, but Halit was never able to put Ezra out of his mind, and one day he abandons Sonia in that condition and walks out of their lives for good. Sonia is left utterly broken, and she resolves to make Paride pay for it. Around that time, she stumbles across the hotels and the time travel secrets in some old papers, and she works out the logic. If she goes back into the past and kills Paride before any of this can happen, her husband Halit will remain hers forever. So she was the one who stole a key from Dmitri that night, and she kept it hidden away for the next 2 years. Then once Hallett had left her, she took that key one night, still pregnant, and traveled back to that exact night in 1919. The same night Ezra arrived in this era for the first time, and it was Sonia who killed Pera, believing this was the woman who would one day take her husband from her. What she had no way of knowing was that, thanks to Ezra, she was killing the real Pera. Then while Hallett was still outside searching for Ezra that night, Sonia slipped back to her own time at the stroke of midnight, back to 1921. And in her rush to get out, she left her ring behind on Pera's body. So now in 1919, Ahmet and Dmitri understand the whole picture. The real Pera wasn't killed by some unknown enemy at all, but by Sonia, specifically by the Sonia from 2 years in the future. And once again, every bit of it traces back to Ezra arriving in the past. She'd never have met Hallett. Sonia would never have mistaken the real Pera for Ezra and killed her. And this country's future would never have been rewritten. Everything started on that very first night, the night of the party, when Ezra time traveled for the first time. It all hangs on that one night. A single small change spun off this many paradoxes. Ahmet and Dmitri rush off to tell Ezra everything. But Sonia, who spent the day with George working out a plan to kill her, gets there first and attacks Ezra. Luckily, Ahmet arrives at exactly the right moment, catches her mid-attempt, and they tie her up. Under questioning, Sonia gives it all up. She's thrown in with George, and she was the one who struck Ahmet on the head weeks ago and made off with the diary, meaning the person they'd been chasing all this time. The thread connecting every single thing that had happened was Sonia, the very same Sonia who is going to become Ahmet's mother. Then Officer Reshat arrives with news for Ezra. British soldiers have captured Hallett. He'd been double-crossing them, and this time they have no intention of letting him go. Ezra leans on the one advantage she has, Reshat's feelings for Pera, and asks him to arrange a single meeting with Hallett. Reshat makes it happen. Hallett tells her everything, how he walked into the British trap, and that George is likely working with somebody else now to get Mustafa Kemal killed. And all of it is going to happen tomorrow, which means Ezra has to find out where that bomb is, by whatever means necessary, and get Mustafa Kemal out alive. Ezra quickly meets Ahmet and works out a plan. She's going to go see George right now. Maybe in the course of conversation, he'll let something slip about how he intends to kill Mustafa Kemal. Meanwhile, Ahmet will record the whole thing on the phone they brought back from the future, and then spread it everywhere. Exactly as planned, Ezra meets George and needles him until he's thoroughly rattled. And in his anger, George admits outright that once they have complete control over this country, they won't spare a single person. And just as Ezra intended, Ahmet captures all of it. They then play the recording for Officer Reshat, so he can see with his own eyes what the British have in store for them. Reshat is bewildered, of course, because he has no concept of a smartphone. Nobody in this era has ever laid eyes on technology like this. Even so, he chooses to believe what Pera is telling him. Ahmet, meanwhile, goes to Sonia and tells her the entire truth, that he is none other than her and Hallett's son, and that he came here from the future alongside Ezra. So if Sonia sides with George and helps him assassinate Mustafa Kemal, their whole country will end up enslaved. Having laid out the full truth, Ahmet asks for her help. She needs to tell them George's plan so they can save Mustafa Kemal and save their country with him. Now that she knows everything, Sonia agrees to help. She tells Ezra and Reshat that George has planted a bomb aboard Mustafa Kemal's ship. Ezra then makes a request of Reshat, release Hallett. He knows the truth now, so he shouldn't be afraid of standing against the British. If they end up enslaved, there'll be nothing left to lose anyway. And if they're ever going to find their courage, this is the moment for it. Reshat takes it in and frees Hallett on his own authority. The two of them race for the ship where George planted the bomb. By sheer luck, the vessel is only just pulling away, so they shout it down and get it stopped. Then at the spot Sonia described to them, they locate the bomb and hurl it clear at the very last possible second. And in doing so, they save not only Mustafa Kemal, but a great many of his comrades as well. Mustafa Kemal thanks them both for their courage. Ezra hands him Paraday's handkerchief as a keepsake, and that very handkerchief is what will eventually be written into the historical record, meaning that once again, the name credited with saving Mustafa Kemal will be Paraday's, even though it was Ezra standing in her place. From there, Mustafa Kemal gathers his comrades and sets off to win this country's freedom from the British. Everything from this point forward will unfold exactly the way it did in the real timeline, and all of it because of the bravery of Ezra and Hallett. Before returning to her own time, Ezra says one last goodbye to Halit. She knew that going back where she belonged was the right thing to do. She also extracts a promise from him that he will never abandon Sonia and his son because she isn't coming back, and walking out on them would be a wrong he could never undo. And before she leaves, she tells him her own truth as well, that she isn't from this era at all, but from 100 years in the future. Then she goes to see Paraday's daughter Layla one final time, the girl whose mother died because of her. Ezra apologizes and gently prepares her for what's coming. She may never see her mother again, but she has to find happiness anyway, hold herself together, and make her own way forward alone. And Ezra leaves her with one reassurance to carry, that she should always remember her mother is in a better place now. After that, Ezra returns to the hotel with Amit. Since they've restored real history to the way it was meant to be, the two of them settle in to wait for midnight, when they'll finally return to their own time in 2022, and never again make the mistake of time traveling, not even by accident. But while the two of them are talking and counting down to 12, Officer George comes at Ezra from behind with a gun in his hand, enraged that she saved Mustafa Kamal and dismantled his entire plan. With midnight only moments away, Ezra and Amit dodge past him and sprint for room 411, George firing round after round as he chases them down. Luckily, both of them make the jump at exactly the right moment and land back in their own time, safe and whole. And behind them, the police arrive and place George under arrest. So instead of enslaving this country, he'll spend his days rotting in a cell. Between the two of them, Ezra and Amit managed to set every last thing right. Now in this story, they accidentally time traveled and altered the history of just one country, and even that caused this much devastation. So it ends here. Let me know in the comments how you found this one. Thank you.